calling this meeting to order. Board Secretary, please take the roll.
Reader.
Present.
Gilbert.
Present.
Aptis.
Here.
Baines.
Here.
Arendis.
Here.
Perez.
Present.
Smith.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, on to approval. Agenda. Can't.
Second.
Motion by Alvis, seconded by Perez. Board Secretary, please take the roll. Trustee Reader. Aye.
Reader. I. Gilbert.
Aye.
Aptis.
Aye.
Baines.
Aye.
Arendis.
Aye.
Perez.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Trustee Gilbert, will you do the honors?
Join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And John Wayne would say, there's no comma after under God. One nation, it's one nation under God.
Okay, any conflicts of interest? Okay, hearing none, moving on to presentations.
Good morning and welcome, trustees. We do have a presentation this morning, and this is on the Natomas Basin hydraulic model update from Civil Engineering Solutions, Inc. If you recall, we entered into a contract with Civil Engineering Solutions, Inc. to update the model a couple of years ago now in a cost sharing agreement. We initiated the contract, and then the city and county are participating to pay a third of that expense. And so we're getting very close to the end of the model. The city's doing some other work, but I'll turn it over to Tom Plummer for his presentation and be happy. I'm sure he will, and staff will answer some questions at the end.
Good morning. Could I get screen sharing turned on?
I'm going to stop sharing and
Okay, there we go. Okay, so yeah, we'll be presenting on the new basin-wide modeling. We call it the basin-wide modeling because the modeling, essentially the precip is able to touch all parts of the basin, and we can see how the runoff reacts from all the parts of the basin. So just the new model is generally called the basin-wide modeling. Let me get here. Let's see. So we're just going to try and give you a quick executive summary on the new model. Obviously, the model has a lot of detail, and I'll try and keep out of the weeds, but I am a technical guy, so sometimes I do dwell in the weeds. But we'll try and give you an overview of the model and talk about how it compares to the older XP Swim based model that the district's been using since the late 1980s. Okay, so the history of modeling in for the RD1000 system. Previously, the district had what we currently call the XP Swim model. The model was initiated in the late 1980s after the 1986 event. It was improved in the 1990s for FEMA flood mapping purposes, and then it's kind of been a living model since then. Most recent significant improvements to the model occurred in the 2014 to 2017 timeframe. And generally those improvements were done for the urban level of protection update studies. Just over here on the right is kind of a drawing layout of that model. The model, it is a single model that does both the hydrology and hydraulics. This is the older XP Swim model. It is generally a what we might call a straw man model. It involves the main system components, but it doesn't necessarily reach out into every rice field and see, what's going on, or into every piece of property, and so that you can see what's going on every property. The there's some assumptions that are done in this model to get the timing of the flows right, as well as to get the overall volume of runoff to be correct. And but this model the old model does generate a good volumetric calibration. It has been calibrated several times. And so it does represent system flows pretty well, and can be used or is used for some good modeling results currently. So the new basin-wide model was originally developed by a project in the basin called Grand Park. And what happened when they were doing their project, their property has some unique floodplain elements, and at the time they were working on their projects, a lot of new criteria came through, such as you know, the ULDC criteria, the ULOP, county standards. Their project is being processed through Sacramento County, and the county has some updated hydrology standards. Just a number of different constraints were being looked at for this project, and they were having difficulty figuring out how they could meet those constraints using the and really deliver good results when they did their project impact analysis using the older XP Swim modeling. So if we remember back into the early 2000s, the orange areas here were what FEMA had mapped as floodplain. The pink area was what they had mapped as the Sankey Gap spill. And the project, the Grand Park project's kind of in that rectangle in the red there. And, you know, they had there's a lot of shallow floodplain on their project. And one of their main concerns was being able to model what the impacts would be of rerouting that floodplain through their project, consolidating it into a smaller, deeper floodplain, and seeing, you know, and then trying to determine what those impacts might be to the rest of the system, and then make sure that they set aside enough volume. So this is an early concept of kind of how their project would work, and that the dark blue areas inside of their project would be the residual floodplain that essentially that would remain after their project. The light blue areas would be like their internal detention basins, water quality treatment areas, and where their pump stations would pump into their main feature. And you can see that would be consolidating a lot of the floodplain and putting it into a smaller, deeper area. And so that's one of the main reasons why they looked at potentially developing a new model. Their original plan was to develop a new model that gave them a greater sensitivity to the types of impacts their project might have, to just make sure that they were really going through the right efforts of determining project impacts and proper mitigation. In the time frame that they were working on their project, something new came to light, and that was the Central Valley flood evaluation and delineation project run by the Department of Water Resources had flown LiDAR over all this area, which gave us incredibly detailed terrain information for the entire basin, which was a tool that we could use to create more detailed modeling of the basin. And then the second thing they wanted to do is utilize a more modern approach in the modeling, so that that they could do modeling that was consistent with the county standards, for development of hydrology and hydraulics components. And one of the things that when you do look at like the county standards for how you develop models, you develop a hydrology model, which is how the rainfall is delivered into your project, and then you develop a hydraulic model to define how the water flows from that rainfall. So they did select the approach for their project of creating these new models. A hydrology model was developed And what this map shows is the land uses that were originally developed with the original Grand Park model, which was eventually bought by the district and that we've been improving, as was previously mentioned, over the past couple years, so that we can do some FEMA mapping with it. This is showing the land use assumptions. The hydrology model is all GIS based, which allows us to account for essentially every square foot within the basin, through GIS information storage and calculation capabilities that we have within the GIS systems. We can generate watershed factors automatically and put those into the programs that are used to develop the hydrology. We did do a back with the project, we did do a kind of a reconciliation of both watershed boundaries based on how new pipe systems were built, that showed us where everything drained. We also kind of reconciled existing condition land uses. We could use aerial photography and things like that to reconcile some of that, as well as the city had some updated maps on land use. One big element in the new modeling, or in any of the modeling of the district, is, as we know, the Natomas area has very low infiltration rates. Sometimes in some areas in storm events, we actually have exfiltration rather than infiltration, which is water coming out of the ground rather than water going into the ground. And so we had to calibrate this model, just like the other models have been calibrated for that issue. This just shows the SACCalc program, which is the program that's provided by Sacramento County for performing their hydrology methodology. And that program is actually currently under revision, and we are the ones doing that revision. So we have actually been able to test the Natomas model under what will be the new version of that program, which includes options for assessing things like climate change and some additional methodologies. Generally, the event that is run using this model is the 10-day event, and then we can run with the SACCalc program, we can run anywhere from the 2-year to the 500-year events. We can also run historic storms. So if we have precipitation gauges that give us time-based precipitation data, we can actually put those in, which is very useful in the calibration event. So what this program does is it turns precipitation into flow, and it delivers that flow to the different locations within the model. And then from there, it's run through the hydraulic model to develop the floodplains and how the water flows. So one of the main difference between the XP Swim model and the basin-wide model is that the XP Swim model basically analyzes the main system, and it uses the hydrology model to kind of figure out how water would be stored, for example, in rice fields and then delivered into the system. All that is done in the hydrology model. And one of the differences in the basin-wide model is we develop the hydrology based on how essentially the local agencies have figured out that the water really gets generated. And then we use the actual hydraulic model to figure out how the water gets slowed down by the rice fields and then delivered into the main system, because the basin-wide model extends all the way into those rice fields. So we're able to deliver the rainfall straight into the rice fields, watch how they flow through the rice checks and things like that to get delivered into the channels and canal system. And I think we just talked about that here. So that obviously the model, this is the hydraulics model being shown on the right. Obviously, there's a lot of things in that model. But just, going into that point on how things get delivered over most of the non-urbanized areas of the basin, we have two-dimensional flow areas. These are essentially areas where when the water is delivered, there's an element that covering every piece of ground, and the elements are shaped to match up against terrain so that water won't flow, say, over berms, but will flow through the channels and things like that. And this is just showing how some of that two-dimensional stuff is laid out. Essentially, water can be passed from grids to other grids, and that's essentially how the flows get delivered in these two-dimensional flow areas. There's also a number of we still use the one-dimensional type of stuff in the new model for the main system. So we have cross sections every couple 100 feet, similar to what you had in the previous model, and we define essentially most of the main flow paths using the one-dimensional, but the two-dimensional modeling is very important, especially in the non-urban areas, for defining how the water gets delivered from those areas. The model's incredibly complex. Right now we're this slide was actually generated a while ago when we had just barely over 1 million cells. I believe the latest version of the model is now roughly around 1.6 million cells. We run the model on a server that is capable of doing a lot of math calculations very quickly. And on that server, this new model takes between 7 and 10 hours to run a calculation. We call that server the super server. We also have some workstations in-house that can run the model in roughly the same time, a little bit slower than that. But generally, this model does need to be run on a pretty powerful computer. Originally, the model, when it was being developed by Grand Park, took about 3 years to create. Just the debugging process to solve all the errors that were being generated in the HEC RAS program took about 3 months just to debug that and validate that the model was operating correctly, and then do a performance calibration to make sure on a real storm to make sure that the model was generating good results. I already talked about how we have one-dimensional channels. There's some storage areas. An example of a storage area might be like a detention basin from a development area. We would model as a storage area, which is a one-dimensional element. Generally, everywhere that the 1D model abuts up against the 2D model, that is all connected through a lateral weir connection. Essentially, that would allow water to go over or through pipes. All the 2D areas are also connected to each other. There's I think 36 different two-dimensional areas in this model, and then all those are connected to each other so that water can and will move from one 2D area to the other. And the other 1D element that's in here is pump stations. Obviously, the basin has a lot of internal and external pump stations. The model is all fully documented with roughly 40 technical memorandums. These things document everything from how the infiltration rates, this one over here on the right is actually the documentation for that infiltration rate problem that I talked about earlier, where we know the basin soils as well as kind of perched groundwater causes the basin to have a lower than expected infiltration rate. And this is where we actually calibrated to actual pumping information that told us how much flow exited the basin in a storm. And we're able to determine infiltration rates. And what we were able to see is a good correlation when we ran the 100-year or the 200-year event. We found basically the same results applied. And then when we ran the actual calibration, it was also very similar results. So that was good. Things that are documented in the technical memorandum, how we developed the terrain from the CV fed LiDAR, the weir coefficients being used. We documented the calibration event, the Sankey gap flows. That was another thing that was done with this model. Since the district purchased the model from Grand Park, we revisited the Sankey gap flows. And we're actually using the actual hydrographs that were developed in the MBK study for the Sankey gap flow as opposed to essentially in the XP swim model, there's an artificially generated hydrograph. And it's essentially a combination of two hydrographs that were generated in the MBK analysis of the Sankey Gap spill. And instead of that, we're actually using the actual spill hydrographs, which actually gives us a little bit lower flow coming through the Sankey Gap in the 100-year storm. Control variables are documented. Pump operations, what elevation does each pump turn on and off at? What is its expected flow rate? What is its expected efficiencies? All those kinds of things are documented in these technical memorandum. I just mentioned the Sankey Gap flows. The hydrographs on the left are some hydrographs for the 100-year and 200-year storms from the 2 storm centerings that were looked at in the MBK analysis of the Sankey Gap spills. Like I said, in the XP swim model, there's kind of a marriage of these 2 hydrographs that is used. And in the new analysis, we are actually just using the hydrograph that generates the largest floodplain, rather than trying to do a marriage of the 2 hydrographs. The other thing that was corrected in the basin-wide model is the timing of when the Sankey Gap spills would come into the basin. The XP swim analysis appears, because it was using the hydrology methods that were in the XP swim based model, appears to have these flows coming in a little bit too late. And so in the basin-wide model now we've got that corrected. And so the timing of the Sankey Gap spills, essentially we're looking at the rainfall coming over the cross canal watershed and looking at when the rainfall comes over our basin and matching those 2 up a little bit better in the new study. Another element that's been modified since the district bought the model from the Grand Park project is the Pleasant Grove Canal culverts. Up in this area along Pleasant Grove Canal, there are several culverts that go underneath the Pleasant Grove Canal and can discharge into the basin. And that required a modification of the model to include external flood elevations so that we could figure out how much water was being driven through those culverts. But the model now currently accepts the flow from those culverts as if they're wide open during the flood event, and then distributes those flows, over land and into drainage canals, as the 2D model would say that water gets distributed. We did do a calibration on the 2017 event. There are 7 rainfall gauges within the basin that recorded the 2017 event. We distributed rainfall from each of those gauges to the different watersheds within the basin, as shown on the exhibit on the right in different colors is each one of the rain gauges and how it was applied to the watershed.
Hey, Tom,
Yep.
I'm going to jump in here real quick. I do have a time constraint from one of my trustees. I do want to make sure that they have time for questions. So I think they have a pretty good understanding. I'll be happy to distribute the slide deck to everyone on the technical details. But if we could get to where we're at now and when we expect to be finished, I think that's where schedule wise and the remaining tasks.
Okay. So obviously the main effort is to generate mapping. I just skipped ahead to where we have some of the flood maps that get generated out of the model. We have blue and orange areas. The orange areas are flooding less than a foot and the blue areas are deeper than a foot. And we're looking at a new way of generating the flood maps along the main system using a kind of a methodology called flood source based flood mapping, where we take the flood elevations within the canals. We're still working on that. We've been working on that for the last couple of weeks, and we will have that. But basically, if you were to take the red or the orange areas off of this flood map, that's what you end up with, is that the dark green areas would be your residual floodplain. Just real quickly, some additional uses in the model: development impact analysis, pump station operations. That's been a huge thing that we worked on so far, is how to make the pumps more efficient for their on-off switches. But there's a whole list of things here that this model can be used for. a lot of what if scenarios, and maybe even in the future flood prediction and forecasting. How do the models compare? The white dots here, or the small dots, are from the data points from the XP swim model for the 100-year storm. The water surface profile, kind of the flat blue line here, shows the new predicted water surface. This is for the main drain down at the south end of the basin. We also have it for the west drain, and you can see actually the new predictions are lower than what the XP swim model would have predicted for a lot of that. And then in the east drain, additionally, we have generally lower predicted water surface elevations, and some of that has to do with the change in the Sankey Gap spill flow, but some of it also has to do with the better the new model does a better job of looking at the attenuation that's occurring. In terms of future tasks, we are trying to revise the flood maps from these flood maps that I showed you here a second ago, based on the flood source floodplain mapping. And in terms of future tasks and tasks that we've had done in the past, we've already done outreach to the stakeholders such as the county and the city. One of the assumptions in our model is that all of the levees that were previously certified would be certifiable again in this new mapping effort. And maybe the city's finding out that that may not be as easy as they had originally hoped. And so I believe there's some additional analysis the city will be trying to run to figure out more about how they can certify some of those levees. But right now we're trying to finish up the mapping. One of the documents that was shown, let's see, back up here, the TSDN, where is it? There's, so this is the TSDN is an information package that goes to FEMA when the application for the interior floodplains will ultimately go to FEMA. Originally in when the 1990s floodplain mapping was being done, this was a 5 binders. The binders were roughly 4 inches thick, and it took 5 binders to do all that. Fortunately, now with electronic information, we don't have to have as much paper going out. But this is a very large document that documents everything and explains to FEMA the basis of the floodplain mapping. And that is, we have a draft of that was reviewed with the stakeholders some time ago. We did get comments from the stakeholders on both the modeling and that document, which have been incorporated at this point. And I think in terms of next steps, I believe the city is looking at, how to they're trying to figure out how to certify recertify some of those levies. They have some modeling that they want to, some modeling scenarios they want to look at. But other than that, we're very close to finishing up our mapping effort, completing the documents based on the assumptions that we have. And then I don't know how much of a living thing, living project this does, if whether we put it on the shelf, we wait for the city to finish their stuff, and then it gets revisited once the city is able to finish their certifications. I'm not quite sure what the process would be at that point.
Yeah, Tom, thank you very much. So good update, been a lot of work going on there. The city is working on, the purpose basically for this is for interior recertification, right? The interior levy portion to be submitted for the LOMAR application. We've been continuing meeting with the city and county on the evaluation of the interior drains. We had a meeting this week with them, and there are some deficiencies that will need to be addressed. And so the city has to roll some detention basins, whether freeboard or seepage issues. So they're working on that. And so probably in the next, and I'll get into it in the GM's report, I have an update about that meeting, and be looking to schedule an operations committee in a couple months once we know from KSN engineer's estimate for our canals, like the freeboard issues and things. So still in development at this time. Does the board have any questions for Tom?
And now I'm just interested in diving back in on the city's interior recertification.
Okay.
Do you have
Tom Smith here. Do you happen to have a graphic of the before and after of what our interior floodplain looked like and what it will eventually look like when your modeling is complete?
So let me pull up this slide. The orange areas show what the floodplains were, around 2000 on FEMA maps. And obviously there's been a lot of different zones, A99s and things like that have changed since then. But these orange and the pink was essentially what was on the flood maps around 2000. Now, when we go to our current model, we see in the floodplain maps, let me find it down here. The model generates all of these shaded areas as floodplain, but that's partly because we're starting the rainfall up on these properties. And so what we're working towards is this flood source based mapping, which would only have these central areas that are along the main corridors mapped as floodplains, and a lot of this perched floodplain essentially would not be mapped as floodplains. But you can tell there's a lot more detail in this because now we have really good ground information for doing that flood mapping. You can tell that previous map, when I scroll back to it here, was what we called Sharpie flood mapping, where it was kind of drawn with a Sharpie on a big map.
I'm a little confused. Go back to your other slide. I'm a little confused on the after situation here. There's too many colors there for me. Yes, thanks. Go to that one. Where do we have floodplain? What colors are
Okay.
floodplain here? I'm having a hard time meshing the two.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did want to get this graphic done, and it's just, like I say, we've been working on it for several weeks, and I've been working with Steve. I've been working night and day trying to get this thing done, but there's just so much cleanup work that has to be done on this. But these darker colors here, this green in this area and this green in this area, those would be our floodplains. These oranges around the perimeter.
And that's similar to the other map.
It is similar. It's very similar in terms of the width. What it would, any high ground in those areas would be mapped around in this updated floodplain mapping, because we do have the higher level terrain.
The major floodplains are basically the same areas.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to, the big picture stuff.
We're very slowly. We're trying to just get rid of all the noise that's outside of those areas. And trying to focus right now on those major areas. Large floodplains. That's where we're at right now. So get the FEMA modeling matching as close as we can, coordinate with the state and county, and then finish up the technical reporting, and that's the recommendation. That's the FEMA evaluations.
Maybe just one more quick question. As you submit all this to FEMA, is there some analysis for, say, a pumping plant goes down? How does that affect the floodplains, or is that something we're thinking about in future work?
Yes, that's correct. Future work, and comparing and running operational scenarios and system optimization review. So it won't just be on the shelf. The answer is yes, we have more use for this. So Tom, thank you very much this morning. Nick, did you have anything?
I can ask you during the general manager's report, but thanks, Tom. This has been a long time coming, so look forward to bringing this chapter to a conclusion hopefully soon. So,
yeah, I'm happy to present it, and if you guys have any questions, yeah.
Can we have those can the slides be available for trustees? Can you?
Yep, I will email them.
Presentation.
I'll email the presentation to Gabe
and
right
then
now.
Tom Smith could dive deeper if he wants to, and have a little
Yeah.
powwow with you guys individually. Okay.
I would like to give kudos where kudos is due to the district, though. I mean, the district really stepped up and took a leadership role to update this floodplain model that, we have our partners, the floodplain managers of the city and the county. Obviously, we're not a floodplain manager, and we wouldn't be the ones that submitted the loan request. So I do appreciate the fact that we jumped out ahead of this thing. I think if we had this thing would be on a different trajectory. And the basin and the folks that live in the basin are better off for what we've done. And I'm really proud of that. So thank you, staff. And Tom, I appreciate your work. Haven't seen you in a while. Things haven't changed much in terms of your attention to detail.
Yeah. I wish I could have been there this morning. I mean, I do miss being down at the district. I wish I could have been there this morning. But I just was worried there might have been some questions that where I had to actually go into the model and show you something, and that would have been very hard to do from there. So, but from here I have that link. So
Thank you very much, Tom.
Yep.
Enjoy your weekend, and I'll
Yes.
look forward to the email, and I'll distribute to the trustees.
Great, on to public comments. Any items?
Just 1 second to transition back to the screen share.
Okay.
It's just a little bit of a technical thing. So we don't mess with it.
All right. What do you guys do?
Theater changer.
Works good.
It's been used to by.
You're used to it? It's different when it was horizontal, right? And the living was. Oops.
Okay, thanks for the patience. I think we're on our way now. Maybe. I know it's not advancing. Oh, back one. There we go. Okay, back to you. Staff hasn't received any prior to the meeting, and if there's anyone else in the audience that would like to give public comment.
Okay, on to the general manager's report.
So, lot happened over the past month, and we're not quite finished, but I did want to point out in the picture here, I attended NAFSNA, which is the National Association of National Association of Flood and Stormwater Management Agencies up in Seattle at the end of the month, and received their first place award on behalf of the district for excellence in communication. This is a very, very great achievement for this district and our outreach efforts for the Prop 218. And so I just want to give thanks, and I think this board should be proud of their role in the leadership and guidance that was provided, the foresight to do the outreach effort. And I guess this is the sprinkling on top of the well-baked cake. And so thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for this accomplishment. We're very proud as staff, and the consultants played a tremendous role. So thank you. Be proud. This is a tremendous honor for the district. And so the awards there sitting in front of the on the dais. You're free to pass it around. It's a little fragile, delicate. So we're gonna get a good base for it and display it somewhere here in the boardroom or in the office so everybody can enjoy it. So congratulations. We're well done.
I just have a few comments. I just want to interject. I want to thank you guys. You know, a lot of other boards are a little bit more split on moving forward, but we have been together as a team moving forward. Tom, since the original benchmarks, you know, when we first talked about it, you know, he didn't shut the idea down or anything. He actually had ideas to share, and and Nick, you were in outreach and urbanization as well, overseeing, the process with the consultants. And, we have a couple trustees who are not here who are also part of the process. And I want to thank them too for their efforts and their time. But I'm so proud of us as a team stepping forward and doing it together, because if we didn't do it together, we couldn't do it at all. So thank you.
So just two quick things. I sit on the advisory board for the National Association of Flood and Storm Management Agencies. And they had a panel that reviewed all of the applications for communication. And Kevin, I don't know if they told you this, but the panel was not unanimous on any placement of any campaign except this one, which was unanimously placed in the first place. So I think that was worth noting. And then the other thing is that NASMA does annual communication awards, and they're not just campaigns to raise money. There are things like, don't dump garbage down the sewers, and here's what you need to do to reduce impervious surface and stuff like that. So I hope the district will continue as it does campaigns to think about NASMA as a place to make recognition for awards.
Thank you, Scott. Other items on the general manager, not in the general manager's report, but updated, and some business items for you trustees here. But before we get to that, we did have an opportunity to meet with Congressman Barra and one of his field representatives earlier this week. Elena and Nick were here, and we took Congressman Barra on a tour. They reached out to us numerous times in follow-up to our application for the Community Project Fund, which wasn't selected this past year. And we definitely can put together a better application come next year. And so working very closely with them, and he did offer a lot of support to us, seemed very interested. And so we thank Congressman Barrett for taking the time to come visit us here. His staff has been tremendous too. They're constantly sending emails and keeping in contact with Gabe and I about opportunities. So we look forward to working on that and putting together a very thorough and hopefully successful community project fund, as well as other grant funding opportunities. So we spent about 3 hours with them, and it was great. September 8th board meeting. So we had attempted to do an employee barbecue in July. We barely had a quorum. Trustees. So we decided to move it back towards Labor Day, the weekend after Labor Day. Good timing, because we want to recognize the employees. Question is, for two reasons. If we move it back to 10 o'clock, that gives us time for our business. And then we could get the bank potentially to come down, and we can sign the bank cards in person. We'll get the banker here. The banker's hours couldn't probably be here till 10:30 or 11. So if that's okay, we'll schedule it, or you can let me know. You don't have to say today, but I do need a head count on who's going to be here, particularly for the banker to come out, because the bank cards are pre-printed. And so everybody has to be here and sign at one time. New policy for Bank of the West. So we need to get that done. We did run into a little bit of issue with getting some checks signed in the middle of July, because we only have, I think, 3 active signatories to the bank card. So we need to update it with the new trustees and get that done. And then also head count for the employee barbecue, which will probably kick off around noon. And feel free to invite your significant other or a guest. Just let me know if they are in attendance, so we can get food ordered. So I will route an email out to all of you, or if you can tell me now if you're going to be here.
10 o'clock for our board meeting works for me. And I'll probably bring my daughter with me.
Good.
I have a little leash.
I'm in.
Tom's in. Ed?
I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fine. Tom, I'll follow up with you on that, and so we can get it locked in. I just really need to know for the bank card to get them to come out to make sure we get signatures. So the date's the same, we're just moving it back by 2 hours. Yeah. And we would like to, hopefully it works out and we have a full board attendance, to take a group photo. So dress your best, because we will be returning from the CSDA Monterey Conference at the end of the month with another award. We did win, and we will be presented with, I couldn't announce this one ahead of time. They said not to. CSDA said you can do a press release at any time, but I'm kind of waiting until we get the award. But I would like to have the 2 awards here, take a good group photo of the trustees with the award, and we'll frame it somewhere. So we will be returning with the Excellence in Communications Award from CSDA for our same program. And so we're very proud of that and looking forward to the conference. I will be presenting on a panel. I believe it's Tuesday, double check the dates, but we have about an hour and 15 minutes. It'll be myself, Eric Rutenhaus, who with Page Design, our outreach team, and then Gray with MBS. So the 3 of us. And so my presentation is due today at the end of the day. So we're working on the final presentation. It should be pretty good. And then we'll Wednesday at lunch receive the communication award. And if interested, whoever's around on Wednesday and how many are with you, would like to, if you're interested, to do a Party 1000 dinner. So I'd like to make reservations because it could be quite a big group. So if you could let me know your interest on Wednesday down in Monterey, I think it's the 30th. Maybe the date's wrong. That Wednesday, we'll try to get together for dinner if you're interested. So I will follow up with you. We'll go from there. Steel Creek annual cleanup. We met with the Regional Water Quality Control Board earlier this week as well to do our annual cleanup in partnership with them, DWR, city staff, American River Flood Control. We've been doing this since 2018, I think was the first. Paul kicked it off and then we took it over. Last year we removed 160,000 pounds of garbage. This year we presented to to the Regional Water Quality Control Board a little bit of a different approach so that we're not continually doing this every year and more sustainable and longer term, which on our side in the security patrolling is seemingly effective. And so we might have a slight wrinkle in our thought and our noticing to have the encampments vacate the premises prior to our maintenance because of some recent action at the city council level. So there's an injunction on any movement and enforcement of the ordinance until they figure a few things out. So as you know, from the past couple of months, it takes about 3 weeks ahead of time and then to commit the resources from the city. And so the water board wants to do a cleanup at the end of September before the flood season using this new approach. We're not sure of the date yet, and we're hopeful that things will progress and we can continue the success. In fact, the city council's actually delayed a cleanup that we were supposed to do this week. So it got put on hold. And that was one that was in the queue. And that would have finished off the last part of the Natomas East Main drain that we had to clean up were major encampments. So when we took Congressman Bear on tour, we drove in there and went by, everything's clean. And then you get to a point and then the camp's there. So we're working our way from the south to the north. And so we're hopeful that we can continue with that progress. And then our security patrol has been very effective. Gabe and I have met and discussed with Brockman. We've made some modifications to that arrangement. I won't go any further than that, but we have made some changes based on feedback. And so we'll be happy to report back as things go, any changes at future meetings, just not in detail. As far as security patrol, you never want to discuss that in your strategy for security because it may introduce vulnerabilities that you have that you don't want. Operations committee, I did mention during Tom's presentation that we're due for an operations committee soon. to discuss the model. When we met with the city earlier this week in KSN, there's a very large number of projects in their mind, or they need to be corrected prior to the recertification of interior levies. So we all went together, gave direction, some further study, but I'm hopeful that that will be resolved in the next couple of months, if not sooner, about what that looks like for us. And then we have to probably make a decision as to what I'm going to talk to the operations committee about to make a recommendation, is that RE 1000 does not necessarily need recertification of the levy system as a mountain land use authority. So it's a comfort level of what that expense is going to be versus the benefit for the district, and how we can cost share, or who's going to burden the responsibility for making the corrections. There's a number. There's freeboard issues, there's detention basin, seepage issues. And so we're studying it further. KSN's supposed to get back to me with a rough order of magnitude on the RE 1000 specific facilities. Some range from 100 feet of raised A-B bed to bring the freeboard up by less than a foot. And so don't know at this point, but should happen soon. So look for an operations committee, and then we'll bring back a recommendation of the full board on how we want to participate. And that's it. Oh, lastly, I would like to continue. I've reached out a couple times to some trustees, and we've had a couple lunches already, and then we're due for some others. So if I can snag you after the meeting, potentially, well, yes, potentially we could look at a couple of dates and then get together for those meetings as the board desired after the performance evaluation back earlier this year. With that, I will turn it back over to the board for questions on the general manager's report. Sorry, it's a little longer than we're used to. We've had a lot going on, so.
All very good stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's, first of all, thanks for all that. And in terms of the operation, maybe I'd like to set that up, sooner rather than later. So I do have to follow up on some of the things that Tom had brought up during his presentation. It's not, I think, probably bogging down this board meeting with, but certainly have some questions relative to the model and some of the assumptions going into that. And then, yeah, absolutely. The bigger picture about who's responsible for what and these improvements that have come to light given the model. So, yeah, I look forward to that. Who else? I apologize.
I'll have to look.
It's Ed, Tom, and
And
Jack.
Jack can share. So if there's other interest, when we set that date, we can just make it a special board meeting and discuss in detail. So so that you can participate and get those answers. It's the most appropriate committee, I think. And then, but if it's a special board meeting, no problem. I'm literally just gonna wait. We're waiting on KSN to get us the data back. Okay.
Operations manager.
The Lewis City Alliance being up on Sunday. Does that impact?
The plants, they're not displacing any homeless, they're just pulling up the garbage.
They're picking up trash.
Yeah, so what they're gonna do is they're gonna pick up the garbage from that's inside the channel, and they're gonna bring it to our side, items, move it back.
We're still supporting.
Yes, absolutely.
One quick question on the FEMA low R application. So we have the exterior levies, that's on a separate track. What is the timing of some of these interior floodplain remappings? And how many residents are we talking about that have fought that are in these interior floodplains? I mean, how many people?
There's not really homes at risk in the floodplains, so generally where the protection is those interior levees that protect already from these areas. So most homes in the basins are in rural areas or in higher homes.
So yeah, so it could be substantial, if not resolved. So, but there's a number of strategies to address this issue, and we'll talk about those. I'll have KSN come in. Steve Sullivan will be there, obviously from Meet and Hunt, and we'll go into detail. I don't have that answer for you at this moment, Nick. So and I don't want to guess.
No, understood. Thanks, Steve.
That's into the general manager's report.
Okay. What about the operations manager? Are Or
Yes, staff is spending most of the time mowing, in or out of trimmers. We're on our fourth time mowing the outer trimmer and Garden Highway, which is due to the amount of rainfall we received during this past winter. As Kevin mentioned, the injunction was set forth on the 3rd of August, it's set to expire on the 17th. There's nothing of the promise applicants to file the extension for 7 days. We'll see if that happens. If it does happen, it's probably going to put us in a bad spot, but I'm hopeful that we'll that's on the 17th. We'll continue our efforts there. The work on this typically needs to see the county monthly, they solve that meeting. Now it's going to a monthly meeting. So they're changing their strategy to like a command center type of strategy where they're focusing their efforts more on sidewalk permits. Somewhat critical infrastructure, but mostly sidewalk and fiber buffer schools. So we'll see how this all shakes out. We will meet them in person there once a month, so hopefully that continues to stuff. We have applications for FEMA, associated DR 4683 and 4699 for the storm events in March and January. There are several county jobs that we get approved. So we're hoping to get a decent size check here pretty soon. We're looking at interior drainage tower repairs, excess of over 4 million. That's in review right now. And 20 fire control associated overtime costs in review as well. So make some progress on that. Other than that, that's pretty much what I have right now.
okay. To district council's report.
Really nothing in substance to report either. Becky has been working with district staff on updates.
Okay. Okay, onto the consent calendar. Can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar? Moved by Avidis. Seconded by Perez. Board Secretary, please take the roll.
Leader.
Aye.
Gilbert.
Aye.
Aptis.
Aye.
Baines, absent. Ferrandis.
Aye.
Perez.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Approved. Thank you.
Okay, no scheduled items. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So
Moved by Perez, seconded by Trustee Smith. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned.
You did. 60 minutes.
Yeah.